and see what's on our mind and what we'd like to talk about and share with regard to leadership issues for a bit. And then before we wrap up at 2, Tom will have some words about the remainder of the year and the schedule that we've been able to put together for the upcoming webinars and our closing retreat. So we build this as a discussion of leadership issues. And some of you have made suggestions and asked questions along the way. We as a staff are available to comment on these issues and questions, but this is also a sharing time, and we have no exclusive hold on the knowledge and experience and ideas that can be brought to bear. But one of the first issues that I thought might be interested to hear, from all of you about, or some of you about, is the idea of maintaining resilience in COVID time. We're just talking to a lot of people who lead a whole lot of variety of organizations who are saying, I'm really tired. This is hard work. And it has a kind of unrelenting quality about it. And just when we think we've put our rounds around Alpha, Delta shows up, and then Delta we kind of get on top of, and here comes Omicron, and we're right back into it again. And organizations are changing plans. Colleges and universities are going online again. How are you all doing? And what are some of the secrets you've discovered for maintaining resilience in COVID time, but in other challenging times too? I think it would be interesting to hear a sharing on that question for a few moments. I think it's a very relevant question for the time in which we're living. Comments?
Well, what comes to mind for me are a couple of things. To be adaptable. I know we use that term a lot here, but really to be nimble enough to respond in ways that are necessary and to be able to think outside the box and be, innovative, to have a tolerance, to be vulnerable and for the unknown. I think the biggest thing for me, I've been kind of closely tied to our COVID response. And initially we were kind of white knuckling it, and then you kind of get into this piece where you feel like, okay, we've got this, we've got to be able to respond in crises, and what does that look like? And we're going to live with a crisis for a period of time. So some of it is attitudinal, but the other thing is sharing the burden, sharing the load, and helping people or bringing people on board who aren't normally a part of the response, but knowing that they have certain skills or insights to be able to use at a time like this. So sometimes it's about pulling people out of their roles and using their skill sets in ways that are going to be beneficial across the institution, but definitely sharing the load and being okay with not knowing, with being uncomfortable, with being comfortable with the unknown.
Yeah. That's good. That's a great starter. Anyone else?
I'll go. I just jumped off a cabinet call where we were talking about Omicron and the variety of opinions that are existing out there right now about whether or not we should be in person, whether or not we should require boosters. I think one of the things that gave people a sigh of relief is that during this time, and this is true for I think a lot of crisis situations, but it's been especially true during COVID, is you have to understand you're not going to make everybody happy. Some people are going to be upset no matter what decision you make, and I think during this time especially, you have to be comfortable with that, because we have people who are supportive of the decisions we're making. We have faculty who are not, and who are writing to the president and other cabinet members voicing their disapproval. And yeah, I think that's just, so like being comfortable with the unknown. I think being comfortable with, the fact that some people are really going to disagree in this particular
Yeah.
case with the decisions you're making. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you steel yourself to deal with that?
I'm a very social person, and I'll oftentimes take the long way between my classes or meetings in my office just so I could see other faces and connect with folks. And that's usually what reminds me of why I really like doing what I do. There are times, however, and this is one of them, where that's not always the best case. There's a trade-off. I've pulled back a little bit from that because the mood among many of my colleagues is pretty rough right now. And I find that the more I take that longer loop, the more want-wahs I hear, and the more that brings me down. So I kind of have pulled back a little bit. It means I'm not in the know, right? There are things happening on campus, maybe about people leaving or this kind of stuff, the scuttlebutt that you don't hear, which is just fine,
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
keeps my mood better. And I look forward to the times when I can take that long route again, and it's just mostly positive, or I'm busy, normal stuff, but pulling back's been helpful right now.
Yeah, yeah, good, good, good. Others?
So I've been in a weird position in that I've really had almost nothing to do with COVID response. I was on a research leave the semester COVID hit. So everybody else is like madly trying to switch to online, and I'm just, sitting at home researching. But prior to COVID, what I had found is I was not spending time disconnected doing my own stuff. And I think I learned the lesson, right? I make time for that now. Otherwise, I just can't sleep. But I think even within COVID, even folks who are deeply engaged in the response, there comes a time when you have to say, I know we're in the midst of a big crisis, but there's not a crisis tonight or this morning. And so for the next whatever time period it is, I'm not checking the news. I'm not caring what's happening in the world. I'm going to do my X. Remember the ball we threw around like back in November? What's the thing you do when nobody's watching and you just want to relax? Do that thing.
Yeah.
For me, it's been reading science fiction or other stuff just to escape and get a little mental space.
Yeah, David, I have a funny story that sort of relates to that a little bit. I've had to work really hard on like redeveloping boundaries because we were off campus and everything was urgent, and I was on the COVID team, but then also in athletics, closely tied to whether we're going to compete and play games and all those things. So I was getting phone calls from coaches and athletic trainers at all hours. And my daughter is now 3, but at the time she was spending a lot of time pretending to talk on the phone. And invariably, if you would ask her, sometimes it was grandma, sometimes it was dad, and sometimes it was Coach Courier, my football coach. And so the fact that my 3-year-old is pretending to talk on the phone to my football coach was like a eye opener for me of like, oh my goodness, like those are the people that I'm spending the most amount of time talking to that she's hearing. And so it was a really good experience for me to be like, whoa, I need to take a step back and reset some of these boundaries. And I'm working on it. It's hard because of the business that we're all in. But yeah, boundary setting for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. That's really good.
And I'm going to jump in and say one of the things that I've realized is not just boundary setting and taking the time for the things I need for my own good, but also for my team's good, right? They've all been working 24/7 for 2 years now, and they're exhausted too. And so for them to hear me say, I'm going to take time because I need it, and I also want you to take time, and really modeling that for them has been helpful. And acknowledging like, this is hard, I'm tired too, and I'm frustrated some days too, but still like finding that balance of acknowledging this is hard, but still being optimistic and giving them hope. Not always easy. I spent a good deal of yesterday working on COVID testing plans and how we will isolate students. So back at it.
Yep.
One thing I could offer Lauren and for this conversation, now that my camera's working, so is having the importance of having multiple support systems. In my other life, as some of you know, I'm in the fire service as well. And the importance of having a support system there has helped me view the importance of having it everywhere. Having a support system of individuals that understand the types of topics and issues going on at that level. So I have a support system of just faculty members that I can talk to about stuff that's happening in the classroom that I can't talk to my administrators about because they're not in the classroom as often anymore. I have, support group of administrators that understand the administrative aspects. I live in both worlds, but also, support system of my own personalness that understands me as not as a firefighter or a professor or a professional, but just who I really am. And just having all those access to all of them throughout this whole crisis has been very beneficial for me. But then I'm also able to share and express those messages to my students, letting them know you need a support system of academics, of peers in your classrooms that understand what you're going through. They're walking the same route as you are. You also need the peer system outside, or the support system outside of understanding your community and what's happening with the crisis based on that, because it's different no matter where we go. The way it's looked at COVID at the university to me is different than when I'm at church, when I'm at the grocery store, and really understanding having support system in all those pockets, I think really are beneficial.
That's great. Thank you, George. Thanks for sharing that.
We have been at Concordia, Texas, designing our minor for leadership. And one of the books that I'm reading, fielding if it should be in there or not, is Community by Henry Nouwen. And in that book, it describes like the completeness of what community is supposed to be, in that it's not just a place where you share with one another because of the individual tasks that you're doing, but you share your sorrows with one another too, because those things produce hope. And so one of the things that I've tried to be really intentional about with my on ground, right, colleagues is that if they need to share their sorrows or their frustrations about what's going on ground, and how hard it is day to day, or those COVID task force people, that I definitely want them to do that with me, right? I'm online all the time, so it doesn't make a difference for me, but I know for those other colleagues that it's important to have a sounding board and a safe space for someone else that you can go to, right? To talk through some of the frustrations. I think another thing too that I've been trying to do is actually pray. I think sometimes we say we're gonna pray about stuff, and we don't really pray about it. So I've been intentional to write it down and actually pray about, God, we know that even though things are unsure in our world, that, you have the answers. And so I've been trying to be more intentional about that too, and to display that for other faculty members and staff members as well.
I think I've got the outline here for an article called Leading in COVID Time. This is really good material. Wow, great ideas. I did not have a time when I was sitting in the corner chair. In my experience, we dealt with crises and dark moments. And there was the economic crash of 99 and another one in 7 and 8 and all those. And then personal things that happened on campus and all that were difficult, but they were kind of relatively momentary, one-time events that you found yourself being forced to deal with. But this has been so unrelenting for 2 years now, and never did I experience a time where one needs to make so many decisions with so little information, and then make a set of decisions and find 12 or 24 hours later, the information has changed and the decisions need to be rehashed. And then the fact that, as Mike pointed out, that not everybody's at all on the same page, that we're all over the map in terms of how we're coming at this, so that you're not winning any popularity contests by leading in this crisis. It's a remarkable time. Anything else on that before we move on?
I might just share a slightly just different perspective. I was just at lunch with a colleague and we were having this exact conversation. And one of the fears that I had when we first were going remote and all this stuff is that everybody would want to immediately return back to normal and not learn anything during this time of better ways to do things, more efficient ways to do things, more student-centered ways to do things, some of those pieces. And so I think that my probably personality is a little bit this way. I kind of love what's going on because it is disrupting so much in higher ed of this is the way we do everything. And taking the opportunity to, yes, there are lots of decisions. Nobody's happy, certainly not winning a popularity contest. And all of that is true. And everything that everybody has shared is true. And that can be very draining. But I find a lot of energy out of being like, well, I'm glad that got disrupted because now we can actually fix that thing. We can actually turn that to be the way it needs to be. There's not political baggage around that anymore. Just some of those conversations. So I choose to spend a lot of my time in that dialogue because I find that exciting and energizing and future thinking and forward thinking. The pandemic is going to become endemic and it's going to be here. We're going to be having COVID conversations for years. And so I think that part for me is, as a leader on campus, trying to give people permission to be like, and it's okay that changed and we can change that forever that way. We don't actually have to go back to the way we've always done it, or it might give, for us, it's giving permission to interrupt a number of other things that maybe COVID didn't actually interrupt, but because everything else is disrupted, we can disrupt this thing too. So I just would share maybe that as an additional perspective on our work and the importance of our work, but utilizing the challenge to really advance some of the positive things that we can do for those of you who are on a campus. So.
Very, very, very helpful, incredible addition to the conversation. Thank you, Carrie, for sharing that. That's really good. I think it's a Michael Thomas approach to try and keep that positive mindset about it and say, what can we learn from this? And how, in fact, can we use this to build a better windmill? Yeah, it's really good. Thank you. Tom, do you want to talk about leading from the middle?
Yeah, I thought that might be something we'd jump in. And Lauren, that great question. Trying to be retired 3 times, I'm trying not to do stuff, but I'm still doing stuff. And what's interesting is that what it takes for me is to walk outside, even if nobody's there, and just understand the world still exists. The wind's still blowing, the sun's shining sometimes, and that all this goes on, but there's still this great big earth out there and this big universe, and God's still in control of it. And then calm down and go back in. So for whatever it's worth, throw that one on the table. One of the questions we also got was this issue of leading from the middle. So we have asked Dr. Bill Robinson, and I think we've showed you his book before, Leading from the Middle. And he is going to come talk to us here in a couple of weeks, actually, January the 18th. But I thought maybe we could prime the question pump with this thing about leading from the middle. So to the group, I now throw out, how do you lead from the middle? Or do you lead from the middle? Is that impossible? In your institution, as it seeks to change or move forward, or what are some of the parameters of that? And I realize there's no easy answer to this.
I think it's all about establishing relationships and modeling, because when you're in the middle, people will come to you with a question or a concern, and you're sort of moving up and down that ladder, interacting with people who make decisions above you, trying to represent or support people who are below. And so to me, it's really about modeling that finesse, I guess. I don't know. Like you have to really think and be intentional about how you address issues and support people.
Great points, Erin. It's partly, right, trust. It's that how you support people, how you interact with them, how you build up that currency of trust inside an organization that becomes so important in leading from the middle. How about, has anybody tried leading from the middle? And either failed or succeeded?
I think I am, but I'm not sure. Or leading somewhere not in my official job capacity. I think mission alignment is incredibly important in this case. Right? If you're leading from the middle to do something that you think is important that doesn't really align with the mission of the institution, those above you will shut you out. And in fact, you may become like the spokesman for a little clique or something. So that mission alignment is really important. And mission alignment, I have found, at least with the folks that I work with, I've had good bosses. Mission alignment is a great way to sort of pressure / influence / initiate conversations with those above me about areas where I've got concerns or disagreement. So it's not just, hey, I disagree with this, but wait a second, we say we're trying to do X. Is this getting us there?
Good point. I think, and this is whether it's an academic institution or a financial institution or something in the business world, this question of power is a very important question to ask. So where in fact does power reside, and of what type inside your organization? And that gets into a whole question of how decision-making and things happen. But one of the ways to really, I think, lead from the middle is to be an incredible expert. To be really good at what you do, so that when the time comes, you have, again, it's this foundation of trust, competence, and character that that allows somebody to lead like that.
We've been mentioning quite a bit the kind of the concept of leading from the middle upward, leading above your station, but there is quite a bit to be said about when you're in middle management, leading those folks who are entry level, who are not necessarily there, and making sure that they become mission aligned and make sure that they are growing in their ambition and their joy in the industry, and trying to encourage them to meet the next level. I know the professors, many of the new people, when you come in as a professor, their goal is to be a professor and their goal is to eventually get tenure. But in admissions, and I know in a lot of the support networks on campus, offices on campus, it's oftentimes viewed as a short-term job. In admissions, we say a 3-year or 30-year person. So how do we get more people to hit those couple of years deep and view this as a place and as an opportunity that we can advance them and push them forward and engage them in conversations that are interesting to them?
Great point, Case. I think this, and really good, our discussion had kind of moved on to leading up, but it's also leading down. And how are you engaged and responsible, or at least have responsibility for those that may be in the same level or lower, for them to grow, both in leadership and in their jobs and their expertise? Good point. How about somebody else?
Actually, if I can ask a concrete question about that, sometimes those in the middle are leading and the voice for an upper management who maybe has made different sort of missional decisions than we would. So how do you navigate that? I got to do X, but I'm not thrilled with it. Do I tell those beneath me, whether it's faculty or staff? Like, how do I navigate that caught in between this?
Not easily. How's that sound, David? I think that is a time when you need to step back and really look at what might be broken inside that whole system. And it really comes down to eventually an integrity issue, right? Here's the direction we're going. I'm not sure I agree with this. And how do I move down? So Pat Tuason yesterday, what did we hear from him? He got stuck in one of those and he left. And I mean, it is an issue. In fact, that was going to be, see, how to know when to leave. David, that might be one of the times to know when to leave. Because people are going to know in terms of character, whether you support this or not, no matter what you say, right? You can put on a nice face and say, oh yeah, let's go do this. But if your heart's not behind it, it's going to be pretty evident. So I would just throw that out as one potential alternative, is to really engage people up, but then understand this is the way we're going. Then now I as a middle level leader have some really fundamental issues I need to address.
But there are times when that's not the hill to die on, to go back to basic comment from yesterday.
Yeah. Mary Ann, go ahead.
Just add here, I think this is a huge trust issue, right? This is where, it gets, Tom always says, trust is the currency of the realm. It's trusting yourself, right? And knowing what your boundaries are and how you need to be reliable, accountable is the vault. You may disagree, you may have some strong disagreements with the people who are enforcing that, but where's the vault in those conversations? Is integrity in place, and then non-judgment and generosity? Can I actually think, okay, these people are doing the best they can. Can I get on board, right? First, we have to have trust with ourselves, and then it's trust with the people that we work with. How do we build this, right? And even though we may not agree with it, if it's come down from on high and we've had the chance, hopefully you're in a culture where you can express some of those things going up and down, right? But once the agreement is made, well, can we get on board, right? And then that's a whole nother trust issue, building that trust with the people who are in charge of implementing it. But I just think that's that's where trust for yourself, what's going on with you and how you're navigating it, and then how you live that out amongst the people that you work with is really a huge issue. And one that deserves some really close attention.
One of the things I think's interesting about this whole conversation is the question, what's the middle? What is the middle? Because we tend to think of our organizations that the leader, whatever we call that person, is the top, and then there's the middle, and then there's the beginning or entry level. But the principle is that when you're functioning in an organization, you have people who are maybe in rank subordinate, you have peers, and you have people who rank higher and have fancier titles or bigger offices or whatever the case might be. And the interesting thing is that's operative at every level, as I look at it. And I was always frustrated when I worked for a president, because I didn't understand, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? I know this would be simple. Let's do this. And what you realize as you move up the organization is you're responsible to more and more people, and there are more and more influences on you coming from more and more different directions that in fact make it harder to act. and in some ways reduce your degrees of freedom. And suddenly you're a president or a CEO, and then you've got to worry about the bishop, the bishop up here and the bishop down there, and the alumni board and the parents council. And then there's that thing called the board of trustees that comes to town 3 times a year. And then there's the general public opinion about how the university is doing, what it's doing with critical race theory and how that's being received in the community, or whether or not it's pushing diversity too hard and the reaction that is generating. And suddenly, you find your world as you move, as the middle shifts, it becomes more complex, not less. And the number of factors and perspectives and pressures that you need to balance and adjust becomes, does that have any merit at all?
Lauren, I love it, because in one sense, we're always in the middle.
We never get out of the middle.
You never get out of the middle.
Unless our name is God,
Yeah, we're always in the middle. And, whether it's in government or business or boards or whatever, yeah, we're always in the middle.
That's one of the reasons I think the concept is really fun to work with, and it's really a pregnant idea because it is relevant for us wherever we are positioned at the moment, I think.
Lauren, I have a question. Is it true that a skilled leader would learn how to communicate to those above and below all of the pressures that you just described so that more people understand why there's more time being taken for decision making, so that it doesn't just look like sluggishness or inaction or incompetence? Can you talk about strategies for conveying the varying perspectives that they're weighing and all of those complexities, helping other people understand some of those extra pressures that folks below may not be aware of?
Yeah.
Lauren, I don't know that there's an easy answer for that. But again, part of it comes from it. And like Marianne said, I keep hitting this thing called trust all the time. But if you have built an environment where people trust you, then I think you have the capability to explain those things and be very straightforward about them. And how you build that trust is over time. And maybe the people above didn't understand how complex the issue was, or maybe the people below didn't understand some other factors in the decision. So there may be some ways to mitigate that. And I think you carry into the discussion trust.
I think the concept we use to talk about that, Lauren, is transparency.
Yeah.
And trying to be as transparent as possible, but like all good ideas, transparency has limits. And because there are relationships involved that are based on integrity and trust and all the rest, not everything it can always be shared. And that places a limit on transparency. But I think generally, at least senior leaders tend to be overly cautious about being transparent, because I think there's what do I want to say? There's something about it goes with having a fancy title that makes it hard for us to be vulnerable. And in part, by sharing the pressures on us, we're sharing the limits on us, and that is a kind of vulnerability that there's pressure oftentimes to hide when we're in leadership positions. Does that make any sense?
I think
nobody's saying no, but nobody's saying yes either.
Well, And Lauren, if I can throw something in with that too, I was a young officer and working on some fairly complicated projects that I was talking to people, and the senior officer that was our boss was just a brilliant human being. And he once told me, Tom, here's the thing, present your case, then listen what they have to say, then present your case again and listen to what they have to say. And when you get to the third time, there's probably something you don't know about what's going on. And now you end up in a situation where, okay, it's not going the way we wanted it to go, but can I still live with where the decision's going?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't always pay attention to that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's great advice. Lauren, you want to pick up the next one? And if I can say something real quick, so just keep this in mind as we go into the January 18th webinar. And we'll hear more about it then.
Gerard has his hand up.
Oh, Gerard, sorry, I didn't see it.
It was from a while ago. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Lauren, I'll lateral it back to you.
You know, where would you like to go next? You want to talk decision-making, Tom, or do you want to talk quitting?
Well, let me just say one thing about decision-making. We did get a question through our email account about understanding decisions in the structure of where decision-making resides. And I had mentioned in one of my meetings with the change group about my 4 musts. And one of my 4 musts in change was this question of understanding where decisions are made. The other one was having a narrative, a very clear narrative for the process, also articulating what you're going to lose, and then understanding how things are getting done. So what I would recommend, Lauren, we have Jessica has posted on the website in the webinars, the webinar we did on decision making from last year, and it includes questions about power and complexity. So you can just go to that one and look at it and then send, I did that one, just send me questions. Because I think, Lauren, we need to get to that last one. I think that's a really important discussion.
Yeah, well, it's been asked in a number of ways and raised in a number of different contexts as the year is going on, and that is, how do you think about when you conclude a time of leadership in a particular position and move on to the next one? You know, the big one is always when is the president going to quit or retire? That's the big one. But all of us, I mean, we talked at the beginning today about how all of you are moving along in your careers and moving from one position to another. And how do you make judgments about where I am in my tenure in a particular role, and when do I need to start thinking, or should I start thinking, or might I start thinking about doing something different? And Tom, I don't know if you have any opening comments you want to make on that.
I need to unmute myself. I think this is really, really an important question. And
now you froze up.
Uh-oh. So can you hear me now? Okay, good. I was moving my arms too much for our internet baud rate. I think there's a whole bunch and a variety of things that impact these types of decisions. So I think we're interested to see what you all have to say about this, about how do you know when it's time to leave?
I have to jump in with a story. I arrived in my parish, and within a year, an old-time Lutheran who actually had been Methodist and became Lutheran through marriage and threw himself into it, sat down and said, sometimes a ministry is at an end because of stuff you've done. You'll know that. Sometimes your ministry is at an end because of no fault of your own. I will let you know if that happens. But I think there was something, okay, less than a year out of seminary, I'm like, oh crap, what have I done? But I think there was something useful there to have somebody in the organization who can tell you truthfully, like, hey, you're still making a difference. I know you feel like your nose is against the grindstone and nothing's happening, but keep at it. Or, you know what, for whatever reason, it's not working anymore. You're not making a difference. Doesn't have to be your fault. It can be somebody else's. So that can be helpful information. Obviously, it shouldn't probably be your boss.
Yeah. Others, what experiences have you had or do you feel like you're having relative to this issue?
I just want to say I'm very engaged in the conversation. I just would like someone else to tell me that answer instead of, I don't have anything to share. I'm interested in listening.
Brian, you're in the midst of change. Can I pick on you?
Yeah, I was just gonna unmute myself. I suppose I should probably say something. So I'm in the midst of transition right now, and I was at Wartburg for 12 years, and there were a number of times that I tried to discern whether it was the right time to leave or not, and I really do look at it as a discernment issue. And so, thinking about all the different aspects of your vocation, all the different ways that God calls you to serve. For me, there were a couple opportunities that I passed up on earlier in my career, in large part because I felt like God was saying, no, that's not the right fit for you. And some of that was because of our family and kids and where they were at. When I finally did decide to leave, I don't know that I went into the interview process knowing I was going to leave. I think I went in with it assuming that, God would give me some nudge in the right direction. And that did happen. I mean, I can't say that I was completely sure, and I haven't even technically started yet. So, I mean, we'll see how it goes. But it was an emerging sense over time in conversation with others and prayer, and just kind of where the other parts of my vocation were, of deciding that, yeah, this is what God's calling me to. I will give you one resource that's a secular resource that I've actually found really helpful. There's a short little book. It's called The Dip, and it's by Seth Godin. And it basically talks about this whole issue of quitting and how you know when it's time. And one of the things is, how likely is it that things are you in a dip where things are going to get better? Or, are you in a descent where, this is the way things are going to go? And I think I just reached a place in my current position where I realized that in order for me to continue to grow into my calling, that, I needed something different. It wasn't going to go anywhere else. So that's my bit of advice.
Thank you for sharing that, Brian. Appreciate it.
And Brian, I'm just going to put that book up. It's available at, not that I'm a salesman or anything, but it's available at Amazon. And here you go.
Yeah.
I can share a little bit about some of my discernment process going on currently. I'm pretty good about putting up blinders. Like when you're called to a position, you really are tending to the task at hand. Actually, Brian Friedrich, the former president here, when I took the call to direct the dual credit program, I had come from high school administration, but had some higher ed experience before, and that had always kind of been in my mind. But he was very clear. He said, you make sure you take this call for the one at hand and not the one you want it to be. And that was always helpful, right? There's an honesty with that, right? Not to think that this would lead to something else, either in administration or faculty or anything like that. And I did. I took the call for exactly what the position was, and have been blessed through it. I mean, actually, my background was kind of uniquely situated for the interactions that I have with high school administrators, faculty, and university faculty too. The current stuff, though, with that blinders effect, and I'll tell you this call that's come to the grade school in Fort Wayne was totally unexpected. And actually the sequence that even led to it is, well, I believe it to be totally God's hand. I kept telling them no. They kept asking me if I would even have a conversation with them. And I had considered some things before and gave them all of my caveats and qualifications and precautions about it, and said, given all of this, the unlikelihood of me accepting this call, do you still want to have the conversation? And they kept saying yes over and over. And what has been powerful about that is I'm very mindful of the fact that there's an entire community of people, none of whom I knew, that had been praying about God's direction for them, the leader that they needed in place. And that's an entire community of people, right? And so there's something that's humbling about it, but then also there's a joy that comes with that too, right? That they've seen something in you that would be a good fit there. So that then has sort of spurred a bunch of these questions in my own mind. The other thing, I think Pastor Ann had talked to me about this back at the retreat, was I also keep thinking about how God pulls us through our passions, right? Or can push us through pain. And I'm pretty good about compartmentalizing things, but I mean, we're all tired right now. This last fall was absolutely brutal for me in my current role. With the amount of travel that I had to do. I have a young family. I mean, I'm exhausted, but I am trying to bracket that and not make a decision solely from a position of pain.
Right.
And yet the pain and the exhaustion are real, so that factors in. And so if we end up finding that both, what if both the passion and the pain are pointing in the same direction, I may end up finding more clarity than I could have imagined possible just a month ago.
Good. Thank you for sharing, Matt. Thank you.
And Lauren, if I can throw in, there's actually two parts to this question of deciding when to leave. And one is deciding when to leave. And two is deciding where to go. I mean, you've got both sides of that. And one time in my career, I made a good decision about when it was time to leave and a really not so good decision about where to go. And ended up correcting that 10 months later. But it's got both sides.
Yeah.
I think along with that, one thing I didn't mention that I think is really important that I've learned in interview processes is it's hard to know what God's calling you to if you're not really honest and able to be, your full self in those interview processes. And there was another position that I interviewed for that I thought would be a good fit, and I was very honest about my thoughts, and I ended up not getting the call, and thank God, because it wasn't the right fit. And so I think that that's a part of it too in your interview processes, is to, it's hard for God to give you direction if you're not really honest with the people that are helping you discern, whether you're called to that position.
Yeah. Anyone else?
This is just like guidance from my father. He always said to me, if you wake up more days being worried or stressed about going to work than you wake up being excited about going to work, then that's your sign. Like you need to pay attention to that. Not that there aren't hard days, because there are, but the 3 times that I have chosen to leave for something other than a family related reason, when my move to Valpo was solely related to family, it was that there were just more days that I was like, this doesn't fit anymore, or this isn't, I'm maybe a block to progress at the institution, or I can no longer be in alignment ethically or, in some sort of mission driven way with the leaders in my area. So I feel like it's really important to be in tune with that. I also totally acknowledge that not everybody's in a place where you can just decide to be like, I'm going to go now, because there are so many other factors at play around family, around friends, around other responsibilities that one may have. But I have a really good colleague here at the university, and it's just time. It's just time for them to not be here anymore. And we've had that conversation, and it's a really hard decision to make, but like so miserable every day. And you're like, okay, like I can't continue to have this conversation with you about how miserable you are, because it's just not a good fit anymore. And you want to be supportive but also want to say, like, I actually care enough about you that we will lose that person here and that will be a loss for the university, but we are not being good for that person right now.
Right.
And so I think that's when you feel like if there's no longer a fit, or there's no longer an opportunity to wake up in the morning and be excited about something that you're doing, that might be an indicator. That for me has always been the indicator to say, like, it's probably time.
Yeah, yeah. The very first year I became of my presidency, there was an article published in Trusteeship, the quarterly publication of the Association of Governing Boards. And it was entitled, How Do You Know When to Leave? Believe it or not. And I made a copy of that article, and I put it in my evaluation file. Every year, the board required that I write a lengthy self-evaluation of the year and how things had gone and what had worked and what hadn't. And I put that in my evaluation file. And every year before I sat down to write my self-evaluation, I forced myself to reread that article. And then I would rewrite my self-evaluation, put it in the file, and put the article back on top. So that each year when I came back to write my self-evaluation, that article was there. And it forced me to ask the question. And one of the key points of the article, which I think for all of us who are vocationally motivated and think of our life as calling, and are so committed and so invested, so missionally energized, it's worth thinking about that is, when do I start confusing my calling and myself? Because my calling is a big part of me, but it's not me. It's still something outside of me, in a way, beyond me, larger than me. And I think we've all known leaders who stay in positions to the point where they get those two confused. And they start thinking they are the mission, or even that they're more important than the mission and more important than the institution they're leading. And that's a real, in my mind, a real danger point. And that was a key point of this article. And I just found it really, really helpful to revisit that every year. And as long as I could say, I still think I recognize me and I'm not Pacific Lutheran University, I figured that was a sign of health and a green light to carry on for a while longer. Really, it's a key part of key management, of career management, key part of career management for each of us. Vocation management, calling management, whatever you call it, as we live out our lives of service. And not only when are we going to leave, but where are we going to go? Because we assume that God has called us to lives that are rich and meaningful, and there's important work to be done in a variety of places and in a variety of different ways. And a part of the wonder of life is sorting all of that out as we go along. And it's 1:54, so maybe that's a good time to quit. And Tom, do you want to promo the rest of the year?
Here's the short version of what's going to go on for the rest of the year. So let me share the schedule. So we begin on January the 18th with the webinar Leading from the Middle by Dr. Robinson. As always, we will record these, but I think if it's absolutely possible, you want to be here for this one. First of all, he's a very engaging human being and speaker, and to be able to get questions to him would be important. Now, I'll also open up, if you have a question we would like to prime him with, or some detail of that, send it through the Lechna Fellows email address, and then we'll put that together and get it to him. But I would ask for that by the middle of next week. Our next webinar is on finance. So please don't go.
Tom, the fall schedule's up. There it is. Okay, got it. Sorry.
Yeah, that falls on the top.
Yeah.
Okay, is a webinar on finance. And the intention of this is not to turn you into a CFO, but for you to understand P&L sheets. And when somebody's talking about cash flow, you understand what that means. Ingrid has done an amazing job for us in the past and uses a model that makes this stuff pretty straightforward. There is also a book called Financial Intelligence that is in one of our bibliographies that can help you that way. And then April the 12th will be the prior to the closing retreat. Check in with your study groups, and you can also expect you're going to hear from us in terms of your projects over this period of time also. Then here's the, oops, that's not the closing retreat, that's the mid-year. Here's the closing retreat. So as we mentioned, travel on May the 20th so that you arrive in time for 4 to 5. For some of you, that may mean you need to travel the day before, otherwise known as Thursday the 19th. Please send us an email that lets us know that so we can make sure the hotel accommodations will be ready for you. Then these are some things we'd like you to think about. Silver linings during this unique time. What have you learned in a program that you plan on taking forward? Lauren does a great thing, a great presentation on how you can think about your leadership future. And we'll also have time to talk about our projects. The closing dinner, we got several questions in the email responses. And so rather than our standard kind of commencement speech, one of you all asked us, well, after you've seen these number of cohorts and been involved in a program this long, what are the things you wish you had told members of the cohort? Or what are the things you want them to take with them? So the commencement speech will be a multi-part time for each of us to engage with you on what those central ideas would be. So that is the schedule. I think you all have a copy of that, but if not, I can send it back out to you. Any questions on the schedule?
The May retreat is in the same place as the.
Yes, good.
Yes.
Excellent question, David. Yes, it is in the same place. So we should have that pretty well set. Yeah, thanks for asking that. Good point. I needed to have said that.
Mary Ann and Diana, anything from the coaching side?
Not specifically. From now until the retreat, we will working through or helping you to think through what your ILM will look like as you present, because this will be the synthesis of who you are and how you show up as a leader. What else would you add, Mary Ann?
I'd encourage everyone to, and so many of you have, so thankful for that, but get your 5 appointments scheduled on the calendars. They're easy to change. We did that purposely. We know you have busy lives, but if you get those down, that's helpful to everyone, including yourself. And the other thing that I would just say is that, you know, now in this next block, we switch more to what executive coaching in the real world is like, because you'll be bringing a lot of your own situations and ideas and questions to the table for that. So we really look forward to it. And it's a great privilege and a pleasure. I know Diana feels that way too, to work with all of you. So we look forward to that. And Tim, I just add that the treat tables will be out at the closing retreat. So we'll have one more chance to experience the hospitality of the depot. So
excellent. And we also look for Mike to find a place for us to go experience the local culture as well. So
yeah, but Tim, it would be a lot better if everybody was here right now to experience the balmy weather that we're having.
Yeah.
And Mary Ann and Diana, the actual ILM reports will be videoed and then posted on the website. So the coaches will talk to you about that as we go down the road. But those will be a video that you do, and then we'll post that in our area only on the website.
Thank you very
So to
much.
add- Oh, I'm sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify what Tom was talking about when we'll be posting things to the website. So you'll actually have homework or home fun to do prior to attending the retreat.
Yeah.
Tom and I continue to be available too for any of you who would like to consult on your visionary leadership projects as we approach the spring and May, and those two will be asking you to record your final report on video and posting that. So those will be available to see before we gather in May as well. I want to thank you all for these 2 days, and I want to thank you for the wisdom you've shared. The discussion groups have been stimulating, and I think our plenary sessions here and the comments that have been shared have really been very thoughtful and insightful. You're a tremendous group. Wow, it's so much fun. It's such an honor to have a chance to work with each of you.
All the best.
Bon voyage.
January the 18th.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey there.
Hey,
Hey, Jessica, you can turn the recording off.
did we know that we were going to lose Anne for the afternoon?